Welcome back. We started with one prediction for your future, which I am just sure is going to be true. That is that there will be environmental problems. Here are going to be three more that you'll have to deal with. The second prediction is that there is a growing gap worldwide between the North and the South. Now, be careful. I'm talking not about geography, but about economics. The North we are going to use as a label for the rich countries of the world. The South we're going to use as a label for the poor countries of the world. It's not perfect. Neither of these labels is perfectly accurate. Take New Zealand. New Zealand is one of the rich countries. It's clearly one of the North, but it's in the southern part of the planet. Use these labels North and South because most of the rich countries are in the North, countries like Germany or England or the United States. And most of the poor countries of the world are in the South, countries like Gambia or Haiti or Tanzania or something like that. And the prediction here is the gap of wealth between northern countries and southern countries is going to get wider for the rest of your life. Now, some people might say, well, there's kind of an old cynical saying that people have, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. That is not my reasoning here at all. First of all, the poor cannot get any poorer because I'm talking about worldwide absolute poverty. I'm going to make a distinction between comparative poverty and absolute poverty. Comparative poverty we're all used to. It's the comparing of one person and another person. And most of us compare ourselves with somebody who is richer than us. And we say, see, I'm not among the rich. I'm not in the 1%. I'm not Mr. Gates or whoever the richest person in the world is. There was a time when Bill Gates was the richest person in the world, but now what? Jeff Bezos or somebody else has passed him by. So we're not with the super rich, so we're not rich, right? That's comparative wealth. Even in comparative terms, anybody that's watching this video is comparatively much wealthier than most people on earth. But that's not what I'm talking about. Absolute poverty is the poverty of people who live on the edge of disaster. They live one bad harvest from starvation. For the history of the human race, most human beings, those of us who never got into the history books, most human beings lived in absolute poverty. We lived on the edge of death from one bad harvest, one bad hunt, one bad fishing season. The history that we read in the history books comes from the other people, those who were not in absolute poverty, who had some degree of wealth. Now, in the last 200 years, or 300 years, the Industrial Revolution and the technological revolution that followed it have lifted the majority of the world's people out of absolute poverty. If there are 7 billion people on Earth today, at least 6 billion of them do not live in absolute poverty anymore. This has been one of the greatest things in human history, in my opinion, where so many people do no longer live in fear of starvation this year. Of course, there are 1 billion people who still live there, and disease and death are right around the corner for them. So the prediction here is that the gap between wealth and poverty will grow, not because the poor will get poorer. They are already as poor as you can get and not die. It's because the wealth of the wealthy is getting greater rapidly. Wealth gives access to education and technology. And we are very aware of how education and technology produce ever more new wealth. There are people, some of you, these students in this class, who will make their living creating video games and computer apps and apps for your phone. These things, when I was a child, these things were just science fiction. They were Dick Tracy things. But some of you will earn your living creating new goodies for phones. This is because wealth, through education and technology, produces more wealth, and our wealth continues to grow. That's the prediction. Here's the question that comes along with it. What minimum level of goods should everybody have? How should we think about our responsibilities to the billion people on the bottom? Another way of putting that question, how can we create justice in international trade and development? It is not a given that everybody has to live in, that people have to live in absolute poverty. For most of the human history, most of us did. But now most of us do not. Jeffrey Sachs, an important economist, says one of our goals for the 21st century should be to eliminate absolute poverty. It's possible in your lifetime that the human race could eliminate absolute poverty by raising the last eighth of the human race out of the situation it is in. That's a moral question that comes along with this greatly advancing wealth of the wealthy people. Next prediction, third prediction, is a new world order. Here you have to indulge me a little bit. I grew up in a world that we were taught was divided into us and them. And fortunately, us was spelled U-S, and them, unfortunately, was spelled USSR. That is, I grew up in the Cold War. Us versus them, both sides had nuclear weapons. We had thousands, they had thousands. We readily expected that the world would end in explosions. I went to a meeting of young adults one time in Los Angeles in the early 80s, and the lights went out. And the first thing that anybody said in the dark was, "It's the war." Nobody's had to say, what war was it? We were all expecting this war since we were children. The world would end in disaster when we all killed each other. And then came 1989, and that world went away. Mr. Reagan said, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." And Mr. Gorbachev didn't tear it down, but he let it happen. He let the Soviet empire collapse. It collapsed for many reasons, and the historians can talk about why a world empire with such incredible military power would fall. I'm not here to worry about that. But given the fall of that world, that bipolar world, the world politics is still sorting itself out. The bipolar world lasted from, let's say, 1949 to 1989, 40 years. We're not yet 40 years since then, and we're still sorting out what the new world will be. President Bush, the first President Bush, used the phrase, "a new world order." Francis Fukuyama wrote an influential article back in the 90s, "The End of History." That is, that the bipolar world had gone away. What would come next? Well, I don't know what's going to come next, but I want to point to a few specifics, some open questions. Russia had a short experiment with democracy in the 90s, and it didn't work well, at least from the Russian people point of view. And Mr. Putin has managed to turn Russia into a one-man dictatorship. Officially, he's president of Russia, but he will be president for the rest of his life. He is the dictator. Most of you are going to outlive him. What happens when the dictator dies? The Russians still have the second greatest number of nuclear tipped missiles. They could easily kill everybody in the world. They don't need our help to do it. What happens when Mr. Putin dies? What about China? China has, since Deng Xiaoping took over in 1979 and instituted basically a capitalist economy, they've had an economy growing at, this is stunning to say if you've been in an economics class, 5 or 6% per year, every year since. And they've got the world's largest population. This will, if this continues very much longer, their economy will be larger than that of the United States. The United States economy grew at an average of 2% for 200 years to get to such an enormous height. But the growth of the Chinese economy is amazing and spectacular. It's a great success of the Chinese Communist Party, except that the Chinese Communist Party is communist in name only. It's really an oligarchy of old men and a few women who run in a country of 1.2 billion people. Can they continue to run a vigorous, growing, capitalist-oriented economy with a top-down authoritarian structure run by the Communist Party? I promise you that if they have a civil war in China, you will know about it. For a brief moment in 1989, there was a hope that with the fall of the Berlin Wall on one end, that in Tiananmen Square we would have democracy in China too, but that was crushed. How long will the Chinese Communist Party continue to rule as it does? And then there's the question of global Islam. Everyone is aware of the date, September 11th, 2001. We're still dealing with the questions of militant Islam. I'll say a little bit more about that in the last lecture of the course. So here's the question for the third prediction. How can we create a peaceful world, one in which humans enjoy religious freedom? You might focus on other freedoms, but I think religious freedom is a crucial freedom. Okay, one last prediction, and this one is so easy. There will be technological changes throughout your lifetime. In fact, there are technological changes every day, it seems. The only question is, how fast do they come and which changes there will be? New energy sources, fusion perhaps. Will we go back to using fission? Solar, wind, wave energy? We can't continue to just burn fossil fuels. A few years ago, there was great interest in what's called superconductivity, one of those weird things of physics. If you get certain metals super cold, they go superconductive and they don't have resistance to electrical currents. But this is meaningless because you have to get a thing super cold. But then we discovered that some things gain superconductive properties at much higher temperatures, like only 50 degrees below zero. And so there was this idea, could we discover some wonderful alloy or element or ceramic where electrical currents could pass with no resistance at room temperatures? I don't know if it's good. I don't even know if that research is still going. It was a big deal in the 90s. But what you are aware of, it is a big deal and is still going on, is artificial intelligence research. And people worry about, Skynet or the computers taking over the world. We don't have to worry about those things. We're about computer hackers. Since our garages are connected to the internet, people can control your garage. I'm not particularly concerned about your garage, but what about your hospital? Or about Grand Coulee Dam? This year, in the year 2021, we had, apparently, according to our government, foreign hackers who hacked into the fuel supply in the eastern United States. So, boy, what do we do about artificial intelligence? But artificial intelligence also brings, artificial reality, which is very useful. When you learn to fly a plane nowadays, you don't actually have to fly the plane at first. You get it on a training machine and you can learn that way. And then people worry about genetic engineering. We want to cure certain diseases. That sounds good. We want to improve people and make better people. This reminds us of science fiction stories. What happens when only the improved people qualify for a certain kind of life? So the question here is, what should we do with the new powers that technology gives us? Suppose, before you die, you have the opportunity to to pay for bioengineering for your grandchildren, so that your grandchildren could then have a life expectancy of 200 years. How much would you pay to do that for your grandchildren? Some people have predicted that that actually will happen in your lifetime. One of the silliest ideas of Aristotle was that some people are natural slaves and some people are natural masters. But what if we could, by genetic engineering, make some really big, stupid, patient people who have no problem cleaning up trash all day long and do it with a smile? What if we could make real, natural slaves? Of course, that won't happen, but this one will. 15, 20 years from now, your teenage child will come to you and say, "Mom, it's out. It's the best ever." You put on the goggles, you put on the gloves, it's all hooked up to the computer. You can actually feel the weight of the chainsaw in your hand. Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3. It's the greatest. Get it for me for Christmas. What should we do with the powers that technology gives us? Final question, summarizing them all. How can followers of Jesus be faithful and helpful, or at least not harmful, in a world of change? It pays to think about the future. I don't want to be frightening to you. I just want you to be faithful disciples.